Have you here today. Thank you so much. So as Zoom just alerted, this session is being recorded. So if you're here for Coalition and Community Conflict Management, you are in the right place. My name is Gina San Inocencio. I use the she, her pronouns, and I serve as the director for the Community Health Training Institute. And our project is a partnership project between our Public Health Institute organization called Health Resources in Action and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And because the Massachusetts Department of Public Health funds all the work that we do, all the trainings that we do throughout the year are absolutely free. And we're really excited to have you all here today to take part in this training and also to see some familiar faces on my Zoom screen. It's lovely to have you back. And if it's your first time, welcome, welcome. A few housekeeping things before I pass it off to our trainers. I want to let you know if for some reason the name on your square is not reflective of what you want to be called, feel free to take an opportunity to do that now. You can hit the little three buttons at the top of your video screen and hit rename to change your name. And you can also add your pronouns to your name if you'd like. And as with Zoom, we are going to try as much as we can to make this training and this space as interactive as possible. So you may have noticed some people have been saying hi in the chat box. I encourage you to add any thoughts, questions, responses, hellos to the chat box that you have. And also if you're running into any tech issues, feel free to message us as well. And we'll be using all kinds of wonderful Zoom things throughout the day today, but just want to officially welcome you, say hello, and I'll pass it off first to the facilitators to take us through. So I'll hand it over to Gracie and or Jasper.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gina. So what we'll do is we'll take a little time sort of framing this up, giving folks a little context and a roadmap for what we'll be doing today. And then we'll jump right in. And so just some quick introductions. If you can just go to the next couple of slides, I think, Gracie, you're sharing the slides, I think. Just wanted to introduce ourselves. So my name's Jasper. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a trainer with the Community Health Training Institute. It's not my first rodeo. I've been doing this for a little while on sort of a variety of different topics. Gracie and I are also going to actually co-facilitate the next training we have with CHTI as well, which we'll talk a little bit more at the end. If you loved this session and would like to come back for more. Otherwise excited to be here with you all today. Not a stranger, unfortunately, right, to sort of conflict in a variety of different forms, as I'm sure all of you are as well. And so hoping just to really sort of skill share and we can sort of work through, I think, some of the problems you all might be dealing with as well and use those as kind of the starting point for a lot of these discussions. So I don't know, Gracie, I'll toss it to you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Jasper. Good morning, folks. My name's Gracie Rolfe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior manager at Health Resources in Action. I don't technically work on the Community Health Training Institute, but occasionally get tapped by these lovely folks to help facilitate trainings. I've facilitated many trainings with Jasper and really happy to be with you all today to think about coalition and community conflict management. I've worked in many settings, mostly to do with substance use and harm reduction, where you can imagine the need for conflict resolution and de-escalation comes up often. I was a youth worker for a long time. I've also worked in cutesy little nonprofits that are just trying to scrape by and sustain themselves. And yeah, conflict is normal and comes up, but it's really important that we have some practical skills to be able to manage that, whether we're leading a team, managing a team, or dealing with kind of interpersonal conflicts that come up between clients or participants. So I hope that this training offers some really practical tools and tips and skills. Like Jasper and Gina said, we're really big on interactive and participatory trainings. We're not just going to be, Jasper and I won't be lecturing you for 3 hours, but we do have some small breakout groups that we'll do, some brainstorms, some role plays, and I hope we all walk away learning something new today. Jasper and I did not mean to be twinning today, but we're wearing the same thing. So we had some twin telepathy going on this morning, but really happy to be here again, folks, and looking forward to the next 3-ish hours that we have together. And I'll hand it back over to Jasper.
Yeah, thanks, Gracie. And I think before we get moving, I also wanted to just give a quick shout out and give you all the chance to introduce yourselves. We have two other members from our CHGI team present today, Chanayo and Victoria. So I'm just going to chuck it over to the two of you to just quickly sort of introduce yourselves in this space. I'll pass it first to you, Chanayo.
Okay, perfect. It's like, Jasper, I need a prompt. Hi everyone, I'm Chanayo Crow. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a program associate with the Community Health Training Institute. I've been with this program for over 5 years now, which I always find incredible. But very happy to be here today. I will have to dip out early, but I'm excited to be here as long as I can. And I'll pass it to Victoria, our newest member, to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Victoria. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the administrative coordinator with the Community Health Training Institute, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I'll pass it over to Jasper.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. And if folks run into also any tech issues, Victoria will be running tech for the session, so feel free to reach out to her via the chat. Or of course, if anything, you're running into trouble, feel free to also just come off of mute, and then we'll sort of figure it out, and we'll try to make it as painless of a process. Can't guarantee, a perfect session, but we'll do our darndest. And on the note of tech, just real quickly, I'm sure folks are really familiar at this point with Zoom, but never like to assume. So in the lower left-hand corner, that's where you'll see the little box that has your mute and video buttons. And so you can feel free to toggle those to come off of mute or come on and off of video. Also on that bottom bar there, you'll also see the participants tab or button. So you can click that, and then you can also use that as sort of a reference point to see who else is in the training. And if you go to your own name, you should be able to click those three little dots next to your name and be able to rename yourself. And you'll see kind of a whole host of other options. I see folks are already using the chat and introducing themselves, which is really great. So you can always go into the chat and sort of connect with other folks, share feedback, especially if you're having audio trouble. We find that that's really helpful for participants to be able just to be in the space and contribute as well. And then the last piece, because we won't really be using the annotate function or some of these other things on the screen, is in the upper right-hand corner. You should see there's something that might say like speaker view or gallery view. And you can just kind of toggle with that and sort of see different configurations of the slides on your screen, and then, the speakers like myself and Gracie and folks who are presenting. So that might be helpful to you as well if you just want to try to play around with that and sort of see what works best. But otherwise, like I said, if you run into any tech issues, please feel free to let us know, and then we'll do our best to kind of troubleshoot with you on the spot. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and get us rolling. If folks don't mind introducing themselves in the chat, just since I think we're a pretty big group here today. Some folks have already started to do this, which is really great. But if you don't mind, maybe just plopping in the chat your name and pronouns, kind of the organization or role that you're coming to us with. And then also just kind of where geographically you're joining us from. I know I see a lot of folks kind of coming to us from Massachusetts, which makes sense since we're kind of based in Massachusetts, but I know we've also got all sorts of folks. We've got, let's see, Twonia joining us from Detroit, and there's folks in, let's see, Anu is coming us to it from Madison, Wisconsin. We have got quite the spread of folks, which is always exciting to see. Let's see, but looks like we've got a lot of folks kind of coming from a lot of different spaces in maybe local government, like local public health. Got folks coming to us from like different maybe nonprofits or community organizations and coalitions. Let's see. Awesome. See Veronica from Texas. Great. We've got quite a spread of folks. Well, hopefully this will also, I think the more folks we have in the room too, I think the richer of a conversation. So this is exciting. Okay, great. I'll let folks keep introducing themselves in the chat. In the meantime, just wanted to kind of run us through some group agreements. So we like to hold these and when we gather in spaces together, since, and this is also a pro tip for your conflict management, but it helps to make sure I think we're all on the same page when it comes to values and ways that we want to belong and be in a space together. And so these are some preliminary ones we'd like to offer up for us here. which is one, just be prepared to be called on and share. Gracie and I are both facilitators in which, we have no problem calling on people. So, do your best to stay engaged and, we don't want to put you on the spot, but we do want to sort of hear your thoughts and opinions. We also want to encourage make space, take space. Some of you may have heard this before, but if you're a person who is more extroverted and you really love to share and you have a lot of feedback, we ask that you maybe make a little bit more space for folks who might be more introverted or internal processors to kind of use their voice and speak up in the space as well. And for some of those folks who are maybe a little bit more reluctant to share, do encourage you to take up that space and to be able to lovingly challenge yourself and push yourself maybe a little bit out of that comfort zone. Of course, we want to ask folks to be open-minded and try to come to this with, not apply judgment to other folks, because we don't know where we're all sort of coming from, right? We don't know the different contexts. This is just 1 3-hour training, right? There's a whole other set of, experiences and lives folks have outside of the space. 1 mic, so just making sure that only one person is coming off mute or speaking at once. And of course, maybe more virtually so, but sort of minding the different, 4 walls in this space, right? So sort of what is stayed here stays here, and sort of, the lessons can leave, right? So we want to just try to maintain and respect folks sharing maybe their personal experiences as best as possible. And to that note, right, just being mindful of folks' lived or living experience and truths. My life and my lived experience is vastly different from that of Gracie. And, we showed up here accidentally wearing the same, work sweatshirt. So just want to make space for the different, experiences and ways that folks are showing up. So if these all sound good to you, and I'll pause here just to sort of let all that marinate. But if these group agreements sound good to you, just give me a thumbs up either on your camera or in the chat, or, there's an emoji function too, like reactions. Let's see. I'm getting some thumbs. All right. Great. Looks like we're all in agreement then. So sounds good. And then I'm just going to quickly give us, I know this little beginning part can be take a little while, but I'm just going to give you a quick roadmap of our time today, and then I'm going to pass it off to Gracie and we're going to jump right in. And so the agenda for today, we're right now just sort of wrapping up quickly this welcome and introductions. And then we're going to do sort of an opening icebreaker just to sort of get our brains flowing and start to kind of get into this headspace of the topic for today. And then we're going to walk folks through de-escalation, right? So what is de-escalation? What are some strategies that you can use and techniques? In particular, using this framework of asking, listening, and informing. Then we're going to kind of go through just sort of some high level, like, sort of do's and don'ts, right, when it comes to de-escalation. And then we're going to kind of chuck you all into some role play activities, and then round out with some trauma-informed principles for you to consider. And then we'll close out. So that's kind of our roadmap. And not to worry too, we'll also have a break in there, I think about midway through. But of course, want to encourage folks, please do what you need to in this space, right? If you need to come off camera, if you want to, need to run to the bathroom, grab water, another call comes up, please feel free to do what works for you in this space. It's really not a problem. I have my dog on my lap right now, really encourage the cameos of pets and children and coworkers. So, come as you are, and we'll make it happen as best we can. And ultimately, the objectives for the space that we want you to be able to leave here with, right, is to describe different de-escalation techniques, to be able to review and practice strategies when dealing with challenging situations. Hopefully, you should be able to name at least 2 principles of a trauma-informed approach. And then to also maybe name 1 or 2 strategies of this asking, listening, and informing technique. All right. So I've done a whole lot of talking. I'm sure you'll hear it a lot more, my voice a lot more in this space, but I'll pass it off to Gracie to really get us kicked off.
Awesome. Thanks, Jasper. So again, welcome everyone. Really, really excited to be in this space. Conflict is a really interesting thing. And I think, Jasper and I could dive into the definition of conflict and de-escalation, and we could go from there. But we actually wanted to start off with a bit of a reflective activity. And so Victoria is going to put folks into breakout rooms for about I'd say maybe like 7 to 8 minutes. You're going to be with maybe 3 or 4 other people. And this icebreaker, very simply, I'll share this slide into the breakout rooms, but we want you to sort of look at these proverbs and we want you to choose a proverb to represent a message that you learned about conflict growing up. Because I think how we view conflict and how we navigate conflict often has a lot to do with maybe what we were taught about conflict growing up. If you lived in a family or grew up with people who like dove headfirst into conflict and weren't shy about, you know, engaging in conflict, that's really different from how I grew up. Like my very well-meaning parents like avoided conflict like the plague. And so that's something I've navigated as I've gotten into adulthood, right? But there are a few different proverbs here, and I wonder if we could just read some of these out loud. So maybe Kelly Kahlo, do you mind reading that first one?
Sure. Fall 7 times, stand up 8.
Thank you. Maybe Catherine Reese, do you mind reading the next one in the green box?
Sure. Sorry, just unmuting myself. Don't think there are no crocodiles because the water is calm. Malaysian.
Thank you. Maybe Joanna Flynn, do you want to read the next one?
Sure. When spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. Ethiopian.
Awesome. Noelle, do you want to read the next one?
Speaking without thinking is shooting without taking aim.
Thank you. I think that's my favorite. And Margaret, do you want to read the last one?
Cultivate a heart of love that knows no anger.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Thanks for letting me call on you and being brave. So 5 very different proverbs that are maybe representing different messages about conflict, but Victoria is going to send you off into the breakout rooms in just a minute. I will share this slide into your breakout room so you have access to it. But do folks have any questions about what you're going to be doing for the next 6 or 7 minutes?
I do have a
Okay.
question. Are we
Yes,
so
Viviana.
are we supposed to talk about which one of these resonate with us?
Yeah, so the question is kind of at the top. We want you to choose a proverb to represent a message that you learned about conflict growing up. And then if you want to kind of expand from that, but what's a message that you learned about conflict growing up, and which one of these proverbs kind of represents that? Does that make sense, Viviana?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Any questions, clarification? Okay, beautiful. I'll let Victoria work her Zoom magic. I'll share this slide in, and we'll see you all in about 6 to 7 minutes. Okay. Thanks, Victoria, for hitting re-record. I don't think we lost anyone in cyberspace. The participant list went up. We may have been spying on you a little bit. We could see, you know, who was talking and who was participating, but it looked like folks were having a really rich, engaging conversation. I don't think we'll be able to hear from every single group, but would love to hear from a few different folks on kind of what you talked about, what proverb was resonating with you. Yeah, would love to hear from some folks.
Oh, I'll chime in.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, one of the things that stood out to me was that what was resonating with me was the Malaysian one about crocodiles in the water, and the water looks calm. And I was the elder in the crowd, I'll admit, possibly in the whole meeting here, but in my background, it was we didn't talk about stuff. That was how you kept the waters calm, by pretending the problems weren't there and the crocodiles were there. Oddly enough, it resonated quite well, it seemed, with one of the other 3. And as it turns out, we had more in common. I was still older, but we actually were New York State natives. She, you know, hometown of hers was where my grandparents had their hometown. So that was kind of interesting. And then the third person was just a complete sort of opposite of what we experienced, because she was able to identify with cultivating a heart of love, which so it led to an interesting conversation, I thought.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sharon. So what a great example of, like, you know, three very different people and how maybe our age, our race, our gender, our culture, our background all informs maybe how we view conflict and how we were socialized or raised to think about conflict. So appreciate you kind of uplifting that, Sharon. Other thoughts from other groups that folks want to name? Go ahead, Astrid.
None of us could relate to any of them. So I propose we come up with a proverb that represents those of us that are in the avoidance. So here's the proverb, and my group doesn't know I just did this. So the proverb that matches, I'm laughing already. Walk the other way and you will live long and prosper.
I resonate with that, Astrid. I'm like, if it's conflict, no thank you. I'm like, I would rather not.
La 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 la.
Yeah.
That's the, and we all kind of shared our stories with one another, but you know, if anybody else from my group wants to chime in, so I thought that would be funny.
Thank you, Astrid. Yeah, anyone else from Astrid's group want to kind of expand on why some people might be conflict avoidant?
We talked a little bit about differences in our parents and like how our fathers were one way, our mothers were the other way, or whoever raised us, and how, like Astrid shared, her mother was from Germany and came to the States. That's right, Astrid? Or you? I think I'm getting confused. I apologize, but just like with different cultural, jumping from one culture to another and feeling like you have to project yourself and your family a certain way, and how that can be stressful. So kind of being very reactionary within your family, within your space. And I shared my mother was kind of the same way for different reasons, but I think overstimulated a lot of the time and very reactionary that way. And so that was opposite from my dad, who's very conflict avoidant for his own reasons. So yeah, none of the proverbs really resonated, because I think, yeah, there were just differences within the family. So.
Yeah, thanks, Noelle, for uplifting that. So even within your own house, there were like conflicting messages about conflict, right? Or like two people doing two different things, which might be like, you're not sure what to absorb or like how to view conflict in and of itself. So we're probably not alone in that. So thanks for uplifting that. So I'm sure, you know, folks can feel free to keep expanding if you want to keep sharing, but, you know, and I think you all have begun to allude to this, but how does your understanding of conflict based on what you learned growing up, how does this impact how about you go about your work? You know, some of us might be working in coalitions, some of us might be working in cutesy little nonprofits, some of us might own our own businesses, but so the messages that we learned about conflict growing up, how does that impact your work? Or if conflict arises in your work, would love to hear some thoughts.
Hi, I'm Chanel. I just try to avoid the person, I guess. You know, I just think like, listen, life is too short. This is a job. This is not my real life. I go home to my real life. This job provides the money so that I can live. Just try to avoid this person if they don't have the emotional maturity or the intelligence to regulate and, you know, help us come to a resolution. You know, I'll just keep it short and keep it sweet.
That's a beautiful realization, Chanel. And sometimes like it's not worth it, right? And like we need to go home and, you know, protect our peace, protect our energy, and do other things that uplift us. So hopefully like we're gonna give folks some skills to like, so we don't get to that point, and maybe we can, you know, there's some things we can do in the interim, but I hear you. Like, if it's not worth my time or energy, like I'm trying not to sweat it. I appreciate that. Any other thoughts from folks?
I think that, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, Veronica, we can hear you great.
Okay, great. I think that the way that people deal with conflict, like post-COVID in a more virtual world, is really changed, right? Because before, if we were working side by side together, in an office, or, it was a little harder to avoid, or, we might be more likely to address an issue. But I'm seeing more so now that it is easier to walk away. It is easier to walk away, and maybe people's thresholds are just different too, for what they will tolerate and what they won't tolerate, which, it is about self-preservation. And that's important, that's important in the workforce. But yeah, I just think I just think that's a consideration, right? For after, how we're dealing with folks now, in the post-COVID era, where there's might have been situations where we were working in person and now we're online, or where we were meeting in person as a group, as a coalition or whatever, and now we're doing that online. At least that's a lot of what I'm hearing from the coalitions that I support, is that they're still struggling to get people engaged, and keep them engaged in a different way than they struggled before.
Sure. And things get maybe lost over Zoom, right? Like tone, affect, body language. If I can't see someone, or like see them how I normally would if I was in person, I think that can all maybe like get muddled in with conflict and conflict resolution. So
yeah, that body language is sure important.
Yeah. Thanks, Veronica. I see some hands are raised. So let's go Sharon, Astrid, and then Corey.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I may have even heard a little of this from Veronica, but so my feeling was like, how did all of that? Yes, what I was describing as just not talking about it was keeping the waters calm. It's the same thing as the avoidance factor or modus operandi to avoid and run, or that kind of a thing. But the bottom line is I feel it's made an opposite effect, because the extreme of all of that makes me almost more extreme in terms of being loud about it. Getting into the role of advocacy, because I cannot stand it being hidden and covered up or ignored and avoided. So it just compels, or makes it more compelling. And one of the things that happens is, when you're in the work of advocacy, you are speaking for people who do not have a voice, or cannot express the voice they have. And having not been able to do that, it compels you. The thing you said here too, and this plays into every part of the field of anybody with behavioral health, mental health, is this bullying concept. And most of the problems all end up becoming a part of that, or a feature of a bully. And your note basically honed that in on me, that if a person holds more power than another, conflict resolution is not attainable because of that inequity. And that is the exact relationship of a bully and their target. It happens in the workplace. We know what happens with youth, but it also happens, I will tell you, in the housing world. I have twice been through bully landlords. They even advertise that way on Craigslist. So I don't know. It was just like all this stuff just occurred to me and just seemed relevant somehow. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sharon. No, thank you. And I think I'll plug another CHDI training. We're not going to delve into power dynamics necessarily. I think CHDI has an existing training around that I certainly encourage folks to take. But yeah, important. If like there's unequal balances of power, like it might not be attainable in the same way as if you're thinking about two people who are having conflict with each other, who are on kind of equal playing field. Let's go to Astrid and then Corey, and then we'll move on.
So I'm one of those people, for as long as I can remember, really sought out opportunities for growing my self-awareness, taking responsibility, like curious about who am I and how am I in the world? And it all started because I couldn't connect with the way we dealt with conflict. As a young 20-something-year-old, I saw my family as dysfunctional. Like I understood that what the concept was of dysfunctionality and how that impacted communication. So I delved into just all kinds of opportunities for self-knowledge. So when I'm in a conflict, my first question goes to, after I take that beat, I go, why might I be triggered here? What is this about me? Why do I feel so strongly about stating my opinion? Why do I feel reticent? Do I feel fear? Is this about control? Is this about I'm being triggered, some, like inner child issue that hasn't been healed? Is my emotionality more immature? Is this about standing for what's right? So I kind of go spelunking into my own self to find out, why do I feel so strongly about this thing? And what am I contributing here, perhaps unconsciously, to a conflict that I'm escalating for really no reason? But if I say, you know what, I just realized I'm having a thing right now, I need to do some further thinking, kind of to disengage from the conflict, because what is it that I'm contributing to it? So that's where I go first. And then because I know how to do that for me, it makes it much more easy for me to say in my own mind, maybe not out loud, I might say to myself, I wonder what's going on for that person. What might they be triggered about? So I kind of am able to go into a compassionate place very quickly because I've done that with myself.
That's really beautiful, Astrid. Having some of those like self-reflective tools, we talk about a tool in a different training called the ladder of inference, but it's about sort of being able to unpack where your assumptions come, whether that's assumption about someone you pass on the street or an assumption you make about the building you're walking into or the town that you're driving through, like uncovering where that comes from. And I hope more people are able to do that. So I really applaud you for being able to do that. And Corey, last word, and then we'll move on.
Pat, reviewing the chat, it looks like we'll review this later. But when it talks about power differentials, is that implied power or power? Kind of sometimes it's relational power, like not even just like relational power, like where people are mutuals, but one of them is like just kind of has the power in the relationship. So that feels different. That's all, I guess. But I think we're going to talk about that. So
I think you're right. Yeah, and we'll sort of get to that. Like you might not be the best person to de-escalate or to like try to conflict manage a scenario. I know I can't de-escalate every situation or scenario because there's plenty of people who probably don't like me and like wouldn't be happy with me trying to de-escalate that, right? So it's being able to name, hey Jasper, you might be better suited to like try to de-escalate with this person because I'm not getting anywhere with them, maybe because of power differentials, because of the relationship, the interpersonal conflict I have with this person. So I think that's right on, Corey, and we'll allude to some of that. But friends, I want to be mindful of time, keep us moving along, and I'm gonna hand it over to Jasper.
Yeah, thanks, Gracie. So we're going to jump into our first sort of just large group discussion and sort of start thinking about kind of what happens, right? And like physically, psychosomatically, right? I think Astrid, you started to sort of allude to this a little bit as well, right? But there's, when you're engaging in active conflict, like, you're butting heads against someone, you change, right? Like your body starts to respond and you start to, your heart rate, things like that. So we'll sort of start there. And Gracie, if you can go to the next slide. I just want folks to sort of take a moment, sort of ground yourself and just reflect and think back to the last time you felt really angry or upset, right? Can you tell me, how did your body feel? What was your response? Once again, feel free to come off mute, just put it in the chat. But what happened, right? Chanel says felt warm. Heart racing from Kim. Yep, short, deep breathing, like, right, you're not feeling maybe quite as regulated. Tense, see a lot of folks saying tense, shaking, pacing, thoughts racing, right? Your head gets maybe a little fuzzy, your thoughts become a little bit less clear, right? You get that adrenaline spike, right? Your hormones are kicking in and you're feeling a little bit like agitated, right? maybe even you get annoyed with yourself, as Dora says, right? Because you get angry and then you get very emotional and maybe you aren't feeling as grounded, right? You're feeling shaky. You're feeling desperate to be understood, right? You're all of these psychosomatic things are happening, right? The opposite of Zen, right? Heated, hot, right? Your heart rate's going up, your blood's pumping, you're like feeling upset and angry, and psychosomatically you're having this response, right? So if you can go to the next 2 slides, I think, Gracie. So we just did this. Yeah. So thinking about that, the way that your body is feeling, right? Now let's connect that to sort of what conflicts or escalations have you seen or have elicited that response from you in your work, right? What does that look like? How do they manifest, right? What are the moments in your work or the conflicts you're running into that make you feel like this hot, heated, escalated thing? And we're going to connect that back to something else in a minute. But I just want to hear from you all really quickly, kind of what are you running into at work? I know it's a quick sort of little frame shift, but this will help Gracie and I kind of be able to work with you all. I heard some stuff about power differentials, right? Maybe you're working alongside other folks in your coalitions or at your organization who maybe have more power than you, and you're butting heads there potentially. What sorts of conflicts or escalations are you encountering? Yep, I see your hand, Robin.
Hey there. So I'm a executive director of an organization, and so one of the challenges that I find is that in my relationship with the board of directors, at times, I feel like the rhythms of the day-to-day work, which I'm kind of really tapped into, versus the more once a month or a couple times a month interactions with the board relationship. Sometimes I feel like the expectation or tensions kind of emerge at that dynamic. And I feel like sometimes I struggle because I'm trying to represent things on the ground to the board, but at the same time, sometimes I feel like there's tensions and definitely a power dynamic, because I'm kind of part of conversations, but I'm not a vote holder, and also they're my supervisors as a kind of a group. So it's just kind of, it sometimes makes me feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that example, right, Robin? Because there's sort of this group dynamic, right, where there's a group of folks and then there's kind of you coming from very different perspectives. So there's sort of like a numbers piece there, right? There's that level of you're right, like differing, like maybe knowledge gaps, right? Like you're seeing how things are playing out on the ground. They're not maybe as privy to that. Maybe they're more concerned about like the numbers or the financials or kind of how things are moving in the grand scheme of things, and you're trying to juggle both. Right? So can for sure see how things can get heated or tricky, or maybe it's a minefield that you're trying to like very carefully manage. And I see folks also coming in through the chat as well with some of these other examples of maybe having someone just tell you that you can't do something, right? That maybe you put a lot of work into or that you're really invested in. I see Veronica saying frequent staff turnover and a lack of streamlined processes can lead to this difficulty with carrying forward maybe some of that institutional knowledge. Maybe some trouble with like middle management-ish type stuff, as Emily's alluding to, right? So, maybe your direct boss or direct supervisor is being really, really wonderful. But then maybe when you try to hit that next level of maybe organizational leadership or stakeholders, folks are sort of, doors are a little bit more closed, right? Maybe tension between folks, as Corey is saying, with like someone being really process oriented and participatory, and, maybe someone else has a different learning or facilitation style, right? That might be just, creating a little bit of friction there as well, right? Maybe you're the person who is being a manager, as Kelly is saying, trying to manage that conflict between two people, and it's not really going super well. Because you're sort of stuck in this place of trying to mediate and to try to help facilitate that resolution. I think Anna uplifting some of the themes we've seen so far, right, with just maybe a lack of trust, right, between staff and the leadership team for a variety of different reasons, right? April saying, and I think this is a huge one, right? Making assumptions about others, right? What's their intentions, maybe different communication styles, and something just falls through the gaps because of maybe like tone or affect, as Gracie was saying, right? You know, and Dora, I think this is a huge one, right? Where folks are maybe in crisis or emergency situations. They're already coming to you super escalated, right? Maybe they're already feeling that sort of heat and their thoughts are racing, and, you know, because they're in crisis, right? Maybe they're having a trauma response. You know, and then you kind of have to meet folks where they're at. And that's kind of where some of that de-escalation and some of these strategies can come in. All right. I know there's a lot more coming in the chat. I do also, in the interest of time, want to keep us moving forward, but please keep those coming in. We'll read through those. We'll reference those. And the reason why I wanted to start this conversation with what seems like maybe kind of like a left turn with kind of asking you all how your bodies feel when you feel escalated and then having us pivot is because I want us to have this in mind when we're thinking about these work situations that you're uplifting, right? So historically, I mean, like biologically, like chemically, right? So the reason why we have stress responses and our hormones get kicked into gear and, you know, something's going on is because at the very baseline level, back when we were running from lions and, you know, hunting bison and all sorts of things, and this is true for all sorts of other animals as well, right? When we perceive a threat, something happens, right? We feel threatened, something happens. And we hear this commonly talked about, right, as flight, fight, or freeze, right? So flight being maybe some of this like avoidance, right? You're running from this lion, you're running from this tiger, you're running from this conflict, you're hiding away, maybe you're fidgeting, maybe you're just trying to avoid that initial situation, right? Then there's the fight response, right? You're sort of talking back, you're fighting back. You're actively engaging in kind of what that initial sort of conflict or, you know, event is. Right. And then there's freeze, right? Sort of shutting down, dissociating, maybe you're zoning out, you're kind of, you know, removing yourself psychologically, spiritually from the equation, even though you might be physically present, right? And so this is kind of just what our bodies have evolved to do, right? When we're being faced with, you know, some sort of threat or stimuli that we're like, whoa, you know, that's just kind of what we do, right? You know, I know that's true for, you know, a lot of other entities too, right? I have 2 dogs. One dog will always run away immediately from the doorbell. The other will run straight to the doorbell, right? That's just kind of what we're programmed to do. And what really happens is that over time, depending on the way that you respond, just sort of naturally, this also can lead to, right, trauma. And I want to make space for that as well too, right? If you have repeated, exaggerated sort of flight responses or fight responses or freeze responses to something, after a while, your body also starts to sort of memorize that pattern, right? And that's where some of these recurrent patterns of reactions can continue to linger after a traumatic event, right? And that also can influence sort of, right, like your own ability to de-escalate a situation, right? If it feels like you've been here a bajillion times, and you're maybe struggling to communicate, or you're finding yourself kind of still stuck in maybe what that escalated, hot, heavy, thoughts racing, you know, adrenaline pumping body feeling is. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And like Gracie alluded to, right, maybe you aren't the right person to de-escalate a situation, and that's okay, right? We want to make sure that you yourself are feeling grounded and are able to take care of yourself. And I see Dora also adding in the chat as well too. Yes, sometimes we also hear about this talked about in a 4th response called fawning, right? In which case you might be sort of appealing to maybe the person who started the conflict or who holds power over you in that situation, and you're trying to appease them, right? And you're like, yes, like you're so right, yeah, like, you know, and you're trying to sort of grease the wheels and sort of maybe alleviate pressure that way as well, right? So yes, we've also heard that as a response as well too, and that also tends to be also potentially trauma informed as well, right? If you've reacted other ways in the past and then that hasn't worked, right? Maybe you're attempting to sort of, you know, like I said, grease the wheels, kind of appease and sort of apologize or try to make well, right, in that initial conflict situation. So I'm going to pause there. I sort of dumped a whole lot of information on you all. I'm going to sort of just check for understanding. Is this making sense to folks? Are we in agreement? Are there questions, thoughts, comments? Just kind of want to hear from you all how this is landing. I saw some head nods as I was talking, but I also saw some sort of blank faces. So I'm just trying to make sure you're all with me. This is resonating, or if it's not, you know, please feel free to challenge, add comments, questions, thoughts. See some thumbs ups. I see some head nods. Okay, Gracie, anything to add? Anything that I may have missed?
You know, I think one thing I would add, Jasper, and Jasper, they kind of already alluded to this, but when someone has been exposed to like trauma or after trauma and has had to live in like a flight, fight, freeze world growing up, you know, that's your stress hormone is cortisol that gets released, right? And that's cool like once in a while, right? Like if you almost get into a car accident, or if you feel like you're being followed home, like once in a while it's okay to have cortisol because that keeps us alive, right? And like keeps us perceiving these threats. But having like being bathed in cortisol all the time is not normal and is not good for our body's response. And like Jasper alluded to, someone might begin to have really exaggerated responses to things that actually aren't threats, right? It maybe is just an inconvenience. And something that an anecdote that I often share, I used to work at a syringe service program for a long time with people who are actively using drugs and also dealing with a lot of complex challenges. And participants would used to get into fights with each other, like, you know, you stole my phone charger. Like, why'd you take my phone charger? And I had to remind myself it like actually wasn't about the phone charger. It was about the feeling that this person was thrust back into, because the feeling that's coming up for them when they realize their phone charger is missing is maybe the same feeling that they were feeling when their dad was beating them up when they were a child, right? Or when their mom was being unloving or like narcissistic towards them. It's that feeling that's then being portrayed outwardly. And I just had to remind myself, like, it's not about the phone charger, right? It's like about something deeper. And I feel like that's a helpful kind of like tool and lesson, especially when thinking about conflict and de-escalation, is that there might be something else going on underneath.
Yeah, thanks for adding, Gracie. I know the first memory that I even had pop into my head when you were talking about that is, I'm not perfect. I'm more than happy to share that with you all, right? As a trainer and facilitator, I very much want to, the approach we're taking here, right, is very much like a co-learning, co-teaching approach. I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. A couple years ago when I first started working, I had a conflict with a supervisor where she asked me to do something and I like sent a snippy email. And I was like, that's not in my job description. It wasn't about the thing she was asking me to do, right? It was very much about this, like, I feel like I'm like continually being asked to do things that like I wasn't actually hired to do. That's like extra work that's like outside my scope of, So like for another example, right, another thing that you might see come up as well, or you may have experienced yourself, right, thinking about these workplace conflicts. But I saw a couple of hands, so I'm going to go ahead and I see Astrid, your hand as well.
So just to add another nuance to what Gracie was talking about, is that when we have those early experiences that lock us into a preferred mode of responding, flight, fight, freeze, fawn, or even knowing that we have a choice, maybe conscious or unconscious, we're also locked into that emotionality at that age. So sometimes when we have those feelings, it's the feelings of a child. And so that way our reasoning wasn't formed at that time. So that's why it feels to them so maybe insurmountable, or we can't get our arms around it, because we're responding the way we were at that age, and we're locked in and associate always that feeling with that emotion and that response. So that's the other thing about self-awareness, as someone else mentioned, that is that what Margaret said, I think it's helpful to notice your own response tendencies, is the emotionality at that age. And sometimes when we're dealing with people and they're like, why are you acting like such a child? It's because their emotionality is being pulled forward from that age, from that time.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for sharing, Astrid. I think you're right on the money, right? It can be difficult, whether it's you yourself who's experiencing this, or if you're responding to someone else who might be experiencing this, right? We hear all the time, like, what? That was a totally illogical response. Like, what are they doing, right? Well, there's a logic to it maybe, but whether or not you yourself are either aware of your own internal logic, or forget about trying to interpret somebody else's maybe internal logic. It can be really difficult, right? And we can only control what we can control, right? We can only really control and have our own actions, right, that we can sort of respond with. But go ahead, Sharon. I see your hand, and then I'm going to keep us moving along.
No, I was just, it just occurred to me, or I thought of, as Gracie was talking, I guess it just popped into my head, like ACEs, and the impact in childhood and what you were saying about just how often can you have, that moment. Okay, once in a while, it might be a good experience to get that extra, but to be faced with that dilemma over and over and over again, it's almost like, yeah, well, this many, compilations of ACEs, the higher the number, the higher the impact, etc. It just kind of went through my head. That's all.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. And then Gracie also clarifying in the chat for folks who aren't aware, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So we're thinking back to sort of the maybe how you were raised and kind of some of these root causes of maybe how you're responding. But on the note of, you can only control what you can control. Just wanted to ground us a little bit now as we start to think about de-escalation. So Gracie, if you can just move ahead. Want to start with maybe just offering for folks kind of what we define or talk about when we say de-escalation. So when we're saying de-escalation, and I've been doing a lot of talking, so if you can go to the next slide, Gracie, I'm just going to have somebody else come off of mute and then just sort of read the bullet points on this slide. So let's see. James Hazlitt, can you read just for me the bullet points on the screen?
Sure. All right, it says de-escalation to decrease the size, scope, or intensity of a problem, for example, and that's from the American Heritage Dictionary, or to reduce the level or intensity, for example, of a crisis.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, James. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to let us sit with this for a moment. To decrease the size, scope, or intensity of a problem, to reduce that level or intensity. So notice we're not saying that we're completely solving the problem or the problem is going away, right? If someone is at this really red, angry face all the way to the left, we don't necessarily come to de-escalation with this understanding or assumption that we're going to be able to move them all the way to the green, happy face, right? We're not completely perfectly resolving this initial problem or crisis that's occurring, right? Because maybe chances are we probably can't, right? Chances are there's probably lots of structural stuff underneath that we'll have to unearth and tackle as well. When we're coming from this de-escalation approach, we really just want to think about maybe we can move someone from this red, angry face to like the orange or even yellow face, and that's a success, right? We really want to just think about how we're sort of reducing and sort of alleviating and letting off some of that steam and some of that pressure and bringing us back maybe to a more, psychosomatically regulated place, right? Maybe our hearts aren't pumping as fast. Maybe we're still dealing with the initial, conflict or issue or whatever it is. But maybe now my thoughts aren't racing as much. Maybe I can think a little bit more clearly, right? That's kind of what we're thinking about when we talk about de-escalation here. We're not trying to perfectly 100% solve this beautiful problem or conflict we're running into. We just want to reduce that level of intensity, right? If we're having a screaming match, maybe then, we're able to take it down to just very strong words and really strong tone, and we're not screaming anymore or something like that. I don't know, Gracie, anything else to add before we jump into asking, listening, and informing, which I think I'm passing off back to you.
No, I think right on, Jasper. I would have said everything that you said.
All right, great. Take it away again, Gracie.
Great. Thanks, Jasper. So this is just one skill that we want to offer up folks today, and we'll get into a few other tips and tricks later, but asking, listening, and informing, I think can be really practical when dealing with conflict, especially when dealing with escalated situations and you're trying to de-escalate. And we actually pull asking, listening, and informing from motivational interviewing, a strategy of motivational interviewing, which is a very kind of person-centered and goal-oriented method of communicating with people, which is, motivational interviewing is really about helping people change or resolve their ambivalence around changing. But we think that this strategy is also, again, really helpful in the context of escalation and conflict. So let's look first at asking. And maybe, let me see, Dora, do you mind reading down asking, what asking can sound like?
Sure. So it says, sounds like, how are things going for you? When are you most likely to be late? What are your concerns about being in this program? If you were to stop smoking, what would be your reasons for doing so? What would you gain if you stopped coming to class? What are the next steps you want to take? How can I help you with that?
Thanks a lot, Dora. What do folks notice about the kinds of like questions of what are these questions kind of eliciting? Open-ended, Astrid said open-ended. Hyunsu saying open-ended as well. And what's an open-ended question?
It cannot be answered with yes or no or maybe.
Right. So we're like avoiding one-word answers, and Hyunsu saying it's without judgment. James saying one that does not have a single answer. You're just trying to like get information, right? And if someone's really escalated, if Jasper's really escalated, I'm not going to say to them, like, what's going on? You need to stop. This is inappropriate. I can't believe that you're doing this. But yeah, Jasper, tell me what's going on. You seem like something's really coming up for you, right? What do you need from me? How can I help you with that? How can I help like bring us down a little bit so we can have a conversation in like an appropriate way, and we're not distracting other people around us, right? It's very kind, it's very person-centered, it's not about me and my agenda, right? And like what I think Jasper should be doing. And some practical suggestions. Margaret saying trying to engage the thinking brain. That's beautiful. So not a perfect formula, but maybe trying to ask twice as many open questions as closed questions, trying to keep them clear and brief. You know, sometimes I do this as a trainer and a facilitator. I'll ask like a really convoluted multi-part question. It's something I'm trying to get better at. But if someone's really escalated, right, and is really hot and is like their brain's going 1,000 miles per hour, I don't want to be asking them a really complex question or multi-part question. Clear and brief. Jasper, what's going on for you? You seem really upset. I want to talk to you. Tell me about what's going on. Try to avoid negating open questions with closed ones, right? If I said like, you know, Jasper, how's it going? Did you take your meds today? I'm asking an open question, but then I'm negating it with a closed one. And this is really important, folks. If we're going to ask, even in an escalated situation, then we have to listen, right? And it sort of like naturally brings us into this next slide on listening. Let's see. Maybe Michael, do you mind reading down the list of some general considerations for listening?
Yeah, sure. Listening, even if just for a minute, has no agenda except to understand. An invitation, opening the door, attending. Asking is not listening. Asking and listening fit naturally together.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Seems like really basic, right? But like, how many of us ask people questions and we're just listening to respond? We're actually not listening to listen. I know I do this often. Someone's talking, I'm already formulating what I want to say in my mind, and I might miss some really important information. So asking is not listening, right? But these two skills fit really naturally together. And listening, right, sitting with silence, it's just like you're attending to that person, right? You're opening the door. Someone might need a moment to process what you've just asked them or what you've just said. And again, it's conveying, I'm trying to understand where Jasper is coming from if they're really escalated or elevated, right? Peppering people with a bunch of questions and immediately responding, that can further escalate people, right? They can get really annoyed. So listening, right? Having some silence, even if just for a minute. It's not asking is not listening, but these fit naturally together. I see some things coming in the chat. Astrid saying our personal unconscious biases and beliefs might be a filter that shapes how we interpret their answers. Yes, absolutely. Sharon saying we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. That's beautiful, beautiful proverb. And I think an important lesson in the context of this. some general considerations. I've alluded to some of these, but silence can be a really good teacher, right? People might need some time to process. Giving facilitative responses, right? If Jasper is telling me why they are feeling the way that they are feeling, I'm nodding my head. I'm giving Jasper, yeah, I can see that. You know, tell me more about that. Seems like you've got a lot going on. This shows that I'm listening. Reflective statements provides proof of listening, and summarizing is a powerful way of listening, right? If we can summarize what that person has said, it makes them feel seen, it makes them feel heard. I think that's honestly like the biggest thing with de-escalating is like people want to feel seen, people want to feel heard, and we really just have to listen. It's not rocket science, friends, right? Jasper, anything you want to add so far with asking or listening before we get to informing?
Nope. You're doing great.
Great. Okay, folks, and then we get to the last piece of this acronym, right? Informing. And this can get like, it feels a little bit awkward to do this sometimes, but can I get maybe one more brave soul to read down this list for us? Informing includes.
I can do it.
Thanks, Margaret. Go ahead.
Telling what has happened, explaining what is going to happen, clarifying what something means, breaking bad news, sharing evidence, teaching how to master a task, giving directions, giving advice.
Thanks a lot, Margaret. Really appreciate that. So, you know, I can speak for myself. I'm certainly someone who believes in like agency and autonomy and choice, and like it's, you know, it's this person's decision to make. I'm here to support them. But y'all, sometimes we need to inform people that like what they're doing is not okay. All right? That's not making me a bad person. Like, we don't have to throw all of our boundaries out the window in the work that we're doing. I shared that I used to work at a syringe service program for a long time, and we're all about agency and choice and autonomy. But like, if you're smoking crack in the doorway or threatening violence against staff, which happened, you cannot come into this program, right? That's a consequence. Like you cannot come into this program because of the ground rules that we have set, right? Or the expectations that we have of this space. If you continue to do X, Y, and Z, you know, you might not get paid. Working with young people, if you show up late X amount of times in 1 month, you know, you're gonna be suspended for 6 weeks. It's really unfortunate, but this is why informing exists, right? People need to know consequences. People need to know what has happened, what is going to happen, what the rules are, what the policies are, how our team is used to working with each other. This is all a piece of informing, right? It doesn't have to feel like a bad, scary thing. It's a really important thing that people know about what the rules are, what the policies are. Hopefully you're telling people about this before it gets to the point of them being kicked out of a program or being, you know, expelled from the program or not getting paid. Hopefully we're informing along the way and it's not a surprise to people. Some guidelines, you know, and again, this isn't a perfect science, but trying to ask for permission. Like, would it be all right, Jasper, if I tell you one concern about, you know, this plan that you have about dropping out of school? Trying to offer choices, again, voice, choice, autonomy, all really important and empowering for people. Giving people choices whenever possible. One option is to do this. You could also do this. Which one would you prefer? Sharing what other people have done. You know, Jasper, some people who have been in your same position have done this before. How does that sound for you? Like, is that something that you would want to try on? And ultimately, when possible, we're trying to acknowledge the decision is the person's to make. So all of this is kind of wrapped up in informing. And I know we've just done a kind of a big broad scale overview of asking, listening, informing, but do folks have any kind of questions or reactions or thoughts coming up that you want to share thinking about this, just one skill that we've covered?
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine how this would look when I don't get into many conflicts, but I'm just not in a position where, you know, as Gracie was describing it, but more of my conflicts are kind of quiet conflicts, and people who either have more power than I do or think they do. And yeah, so just informing feels very different. I mean, I could see like asking permission about like, can you listen to my side of this and how I understand it? Or I also see this as a way of really correcting misperceptions, or just people just aren't operating with the same information.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right on, Margaret. Yeah, this might feel more appropriate in like the heat of an escalation, but I think it, you know, you're onto something, that it can translate to quieter interpersonal interactions with, you know, maybe someone who disagrees with how you put this report together, or disagrees on like the type of funding that you're deciding to go after. I think you can still deploy these skills. It might just be in a more nuanced way. So appreciate you raising that. Let's go to Dora and then we'll move on.
I was going to say there's so much power in silence too, like when you ask these questions, or even when you're informing, to pause and to really like allow that person to reflect on what you've asked, and holding that silence. And you know, sometimes it can be, some people say it's kind of uncomfortable, but there's so much power in just being quiet and like letting them reflect on what you've asked them.
Definitely. It's a really good teacher. Jasper, anything that you want to add or uplift?
Nothing that I think hasn't already been said. Just definitely reiterating the like asking permission and informed consent piece of things, right? I know I've been in situations countless times, and I know I'm guilty of this too, right? But where I'll be maybe like, someone will ask, oh, you know, Jasper, how are you doing? And I'll start venting and I'll, you know, share all these things, and then they'll immediately jump in with like, oh, have you tried, or I would try this thing, or, you know, and getting that unsolicited advice or feedback is not at all conducive to maybe where it is that I'm coming from. Because maybe I'm not in a solutions oriented headspace. Maybe I just really need to get things off my chest. So just really want to echo this, like asking permission and making sure that you're checking in with folks before you sort of start maybe some of this informing piece. Because maybe people just really need to get this out of their system first before they're even in a headspace to be able to receive this information, right? So always just, you know, recommending to check back in with that person before you start to maybe offer up some of the solutions pieces. Yeah.
Thanks, Jasper. Astrid, I'll give you the last word, and then
I was just thinking,
role play.
As adults, I think these choices are really important to give to children. Within the limit of what we're allowing them. The choice is only consisting of things we actually would allow, but this kind of empowerment, this kind of giving the control back to the listener, or the speaker. I was just imagining saying something similar to this to a younger person, so that they really do feel heard, recognized, and that there's choice involved to avoid a conflict. You know, that's where my mind went also. So outside of the work setting though. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd be willing to bet, like, a lot of the work that you all do and the coalitions that you're a part of and the work that you do, you may be working with people like your clients, participants, guests, who maybe have not had a lot of agency or choice in their life, or have even been asked, like, what would you prefer to do, right? They're probably have just been told. So yeah, whenever possible, like giving people voice, choice, agency, is powerful. So thanks for uplifting that, Astrid. All right, friends. We're gonna get into a role play, and then Jasper, I think we'll move the break after this section. We'll just do some rearranging for some on the fly changing and facilitation, but we're gonna get you into a role play now. Jasper and I would never ask you to do something that we ourselves are not prepared to do. So we're gonna model a little role play, and then we're gonna give folks a scenario, send you off into some breakout rooms to really try on this asking, listening, informing piece. Jasper is going to be like a participant of a program that I work at. I'm going to be a worker, and Jasper is just having some feelings about something that has come up. For folks who have been to any of our trainings before, you know that we like to do this thing called lights, camera, action. It just lets us know that all of your focus and attention is on us. So what I need everyone to do with me, I need you to push out the lights. The stage is dark. You can't see us. Like, we're not lit up yet. We need the lights. So if everyone wants to do lights, here we go. Let's push out the lights. There we go. Lights. Then we're gonna roll our like old time camera. And then we're gonna clap our hands and say, action. Hey, Jasper, sounded like there was a bit of commotion and yelling happening out here. Tell me what's going on.
Well, Gracie, I'm waiting here for my appointment. You know, I always see the same counselor. I always see my counselor. And then this person just cut in front of me in line and they got to see their counselor before me. Like, what, who are they? Why are they? I was here first. I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. That sounds really frustrating, Jasper. I could totally like sympathize with that feeling. But, you know, I know that you meet with Mike on Thursdays at 11:30. So, you know, there's no need to worry. You'll definitely be able to see him when it's time for your appointment.
Right, but why did this person who just cut in front of me get to see their person first? I mean, I've been waiting here for like almost an hour now. Like, I don't understand why this person could just come in and take my spot.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that this is coming up for you. I see, like, you know, this is upsetting. I hear you. I want to reassure you that, you know, you have your set appointment with Mike. I can definitely talk to the person who bumped into you and cut you. That wasn't cool. My guess is maybe they had an earlier appointment than you, but I'll definitely talk to them. But I know that you meet with him at 11:30 on Thursdays. I can check his calendar on his door to ensure that you're meeting with him. I also just want to be respectful of folks who are taking part in our quiet hours right now. You know, some folks often stay up all night because they don't have a place to sleep. They come here to rest in the morning. I know you've taken part in the quiet hours before, so I'm just wondering if maybe you want to like take a walk around the block with me before your appointment with Mike.
No, I don't want to leave the building. I want to stay here so I can hear when Mike calls my name.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So we'll stay in the building. I'm wondering what can we do so that we can all coexist in this space while honoring the quiet hours that we have. You know, you've helped me with this before, Jasper. You're really good at like organizing shelves, and I have some shelves in my office that need to be organized. What do you think about doing that?
I don't know. How will I know when my appointment is ready, or if Mike calls my name if I'm in your office?
You know, Mike's office is actually right across from mine, and we can also keep the door open so you can hear your name when he calls for you when it's time for your appointment.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I guess that would work.
Okay, sounds great. Why don't we go there now? And scene. Okay. Besides Oscar-worthy acting, what did folks notice from the asking, listening, informing? Taking with a grain of salt, it's a little simulated role play. Anything that folks want to name?
You know, she definitely made reference to the fact that she could relate to the situation. Well, you and the role did it potentially more than once, but also to kind of giving options, but in the giving of those options also mentioning, you know, why, you know, the quiet time of the group. It's a consideration of others and the option of going out for a walk. Okay, no, and that. So those are a couple of things that stood out to me.
Yeah. So trying to offer up Jasper some options. I see Diane saying in the chat, listening and de-escalating. Astrid saying choice and control was offered. James saying validating their feelings, but also providing information about other possible reasons for the situation which has arisen, right? Yeah, I can't control that this person bumped into Jasper. I can maybe make an effort to talk to them, but, you know, I want to make sure that we can all exist in this space together and that we're not further escalating it. Yeah. Anything else that folks want to name? Okay, it's your turn, y'all. Throwing you in the deep end. But we're gonna be able to do it. So Victoria is gonna make groups of 3. There are gonna be 3 people in your breakout rooms. And this is the scenario. I'll put this in the chat. We'll probably also share this into the breakout rooms. But Amy, do you mind reading this out loud for the group? Coming off mute and reading the scenario out loud? Amy Gaspari? And Amy, you're on mute.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Sure. You work with your colleagues on a variety of public health topics. One of your colleagues, who is less senior than you, often questions your knowledge and ideas for solving problems and planning programs. Today, in your team meeting, the staff person has strongly questioned the strategy of hosting focus groups of young people to provide feedback to your latest tobacco prevention initiative. This strategy was your idea after hearing much feedback from youth programs about the importance of hearing directly from the community. After the meeting, you approach this staff person, who can easily become defensive, and explain that you are moving forward with this focus group plan.
Thanks a lot, Amy. Appreciate you reading that out loud. So that is in the chat. We'll also share it into the breakout rooms, but this is going to be the direction. So 3 people in your rooms. Person with the longest hair, you're going to be the person using asking, listening, informing. So you're trying to de-escalate this situation, right? And this person is coming to you being defensive. You're trying to de-escalate. Person with shortest hair, so the other coworker, you're going to be the escalated person or the defensive person. And if you've got medium length hair, you're just going to be observing and using asking, listening, informing. Just want you to do your best to try on having a dialogue in this scenario. I think for the sake of time, maybe we'll do 8 minutes in these breakout rooms. We'll broadcast a message maybe halfway through for you to switch roles, but be prepared to share back about how it went. And let me just pause here and see if there's any questions or thoughts before we send you off. Great. Putting our acting hats on. I'll let Victoria work her Zoom magic, and we'll see you all in about 8 minutes. Okay. Welcome back. Heard already from a few folks. It was a fruitful, rich conversation. Would love to hear it maybe from some new folks we haven't heard from yet today. I just want to welcome other voices into the space. Maybe Rosa and Catherine, I'll put you on the spot. Rosa, do you want to, you were like left on a cliffhanger, but how did that go for you all? Like, how did it, what asking, listening, informing did you feel like was used, and anything else you want to share?
Well, I was the aggressor, and those who know me in the public world, that is just hard for me to do, and just, I am a listener. I do practice all the remedies you shared, being authentic with listening and just being humble in the space when people are feeling edgy or we're not in disagreement. I could agree to disagree. So it was hard for me to play role play the mean girl, and so, and then Liz was being so compassionate and empathizing with me. So it was even rough to be in that role, because I was saying, how pathetic do I sound? Just crying over, over something that's resolvable, you could resolve, and, you could find, so it was hard to kind of play a role that you're not used to. And so, and then my observer was giving some phenomenal feedback, and then I kind of got into the room, but I just wanted to share that piece. But Liz could share probably how she was feeling with the words that I was choosing. I probably was hurting her feelings. And so I'm glad this was all role play. I would never approach her in that form or matter.
Thanks, Rosa. So
Rosa
definitely
did
hear
a
it.
great job.
Yeah, Lindsay, do you want to say more?
She did a great job. You know, we had a hard time not laughing listening to ourselves, but you know, it was easier being the de-escalator than it was like. Then I'm glad I got that position, because like she said, like, you know, do I really sound like this? You know, how pathetic am I being about, you know, this, when there's better ways to handle it. But it was a good experience.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Definitely hear you, Rosa. It can feel weird to like put on the hat of a role of someone like that's not how we normally act or normally speak, but I appreciate you like humoring us and diving in and doing that. And thanks, Catherine, Lindsay, and Rosa for your thoughts. I see Emily put in the chat, I was observing and thought that Michael and Margaret did great. Margaret educated about why they were doing what they were doing and opened up to suggestions and how Michael can be involved in the next steps. That's really beautiful. Yeah, like kind of like appeasing to that person. I really want your input next time we do this, and I want to make sure that your voice can be heard, like while we're trying to go in the direction that I'm going. So that's a really nuanced and sophisticated skill. So thanks for naming that. Emily, Astrid saying Kim was magnificent in her role as the escalator. I became soft butter in her capable hands. Gina saying sounds like Oscar-worthy performances all around. So thanks, folks. I know, you know, again, these are like simulated. They might not go like perfectly, but just, you know, we like to do these as a skill builder to like offer you the opportunity to practice, because we can talk about asking, listening, and forming, but really giving you time to practice. And I want to honor our dignity and humanity that we've been working hard. It's 11:44 right now, so let's just call it 11:45. Let's come back. Sorry, we don't have the break slide here. Let's come back in 10 minutes. So at 11:55 Eastern Standard Time, let's come back and we'll resume. I'll put a timer up on the screen, but we'll see you all in about 10 minutes. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks for hitting record again. So what we're going to do in our last hour together is we're just going to quickly go over some practical advice and tips and tricks for managing conflict and things like tone and body language and pieces like that. Kind of chuck you all through another role play so that you all can really kind of practice trying these skills on. And then I'll kick it back to Gracie for some trauma-informed practices. So I hope y'all had a good, hopefully, screen break. We're able to rest your eyes a little bit, and we'll just kind of power through this last hour together. So if you can go to the next slide, Gracie. These are just some things to maybe keep in the back of your head, you know, in the back burner, maybe when you're sort of managing conflict. You know, this situation unveils in front of you, and you're like, okay, what do I do now? So these are just a couple, you know, things to maybe keep in mind that we recommend. But first of all is really thinking around, maybe you can't do this in this moment, but thinking about how to build and maintain maybe this culture of trust, right? I know, at least for myself, speaking personally, a lot of the conflict that arises in my life usually comes from this lack of trust, right? Like, I can't trust this person to keep my intentions and my goals, you know, held to heart, or I don't really know where they're coming from. I don't really, you know, believe what they're saying maybe. So keeping this culture of trust and trying to build that culture of trust, I think, is really, really helpful, because then that kind of gives, right, the grace and the benefit of the doubt, right? Maybe when you're working with this person, like, okay, maybe they do have good intentions, but that comment landed super, you know, not right, or, you know, things like that. Of course, especially for in-person settings, I know we spent a little time talking about kind of how the virtual environment has sort of shifted maybe some of the ways that we exist in space together, but particularly physically, but also psychologically, we all want you to think safety, right? Do not try to de-escalate or manage conflict or get into a situation if it is unsafe for you to do that, right? Of course, this, you know, we're thinking about maybe physically, if you have in-person programming, right, as Gracie was sharing, maybe folks are feeling really escalated or, you know, are having trauma reactions to things and are acting really erratically. But also encourage you to think about like emotional and psychological safety for yourself as well, right? There have for sure 100% been times where maybe I'm feeling escalated and I want to You know, I'm a very big, you know, in the flight, fight, freeze, I'm a very big fight person. I want to get in, I want to solve the conflict, I want to try to figure out things, I want to lean into the messiness. But if I'm feeling escalated and I'm feeling maybe triggered or having a trauma response myself, it's probably not the best, you know, for myself, for my own psychological safety to continue to engage, right? You know, that's when maybe I'm going to tap out and say, you know, we're going to come back to this later, or, you know, hey, XYZ other person, can you maybe step in here? I just need to like take a couple deep breaths and like really try to regulate my own sort of response to this situation first, right? Also want you to keep in the back of your head sort of like, what is the problem, right? As, you know, to use the example from earlier, is this really about the phone charger, or is this maybe about, you know, having things maybe stolen or taken away from me before when I didn't understand why? Or, you know, is this a trauma response, or is this, you know, fundamentally, you know, am I having, you know, just a conflict of personality with the, you know, like what's the root issue, right? Because a lot of the times conflict isn't necessarily just the conflict itself, it's the tip of the iceberg, right? So just trying to maybe take a step back and try to figure out, you know, like what's the problem here? Like what's the root cause? Also always helpful to think about the choices and options. There are 9 times out of 10, I think there's going to be more choices and options than you might be seeing initially if you're immediately confronted with a problem, right? You know, maybe you're the only staff person, you know, who's in person at that moment, but is there somebody like a coworker or supervisor you can call and get them on the phone and ask them for advice, or maybe have them maybe speak to the person, right? I think this also really comes into play when you're maybe thinking about sort of your own identities as well, right? I know for a fact there are times where I might be saying something, maybe in a, you know, like an anti-racism training or something that we're doing, right? And I might say something and it might just not land well for folks. And then I might tap Gracie as someone with white privilege to say, hey, Gracie, could you just like could you just like say the thing that I said again? And maybe it lands better for folks, right? So thinking about sort of the personal identities as well, and what you might be, the additional interpersonal risk you might be taking on as well, when thinking about sort of personal privilege and identity too, is a big factor as well, right? I'm just going to be like super upfront about that, right? There are times where I might choose to I might not be the best de-escalator, right? If it's as a trans person, right? If it's something that's directly impacting myself or my community. For a variety of reasons, right? So center yourself, take care of yourself first, set those boundaries, try to figure out like what choices and options and what your role is in that space, right? You might be maybe a more, you know, what's it called? Like a external person, right? On your team, you might be interacting with a lot more clients or coalition members, people like that. Maybe there's someone who's more internal. Sorry, my dog is barking. His role in this is to supervise my training facilitation style, so I apologize. And of course, lastly, we want us to think about bringing us back to sort of a one team approach, right? A lot of the times, I think when we're faced with conflict, there's sort of this inherent like oppositional framework, right? Like this, like us versus them, right? I encourage you to think back maybe to the role play that Gracie and I did, where Gracie was like, you know, we're both in this space together. How can we coexist in this space? There's other folks in the space as well too. There's quiet hours, right? We're all on the same page, right? I'm not trying to tell you that you need to get back in line, that, you know, the person who cut you off was, you know, completely against the policies. You know, I'm going to talk to them, right? We tried to deconstruct a little bit of that like oppositional framework. And try to bring us back to sort of like, we're all in this together. We're all in this space together. We're all on one team. What can we work towards to get you to the goal, right? Like, how can I make sure that you can get to your appointment with Mike at what, 12:30 or 11:30 or what have you? You know, what are the different pieces that we can sort of take to get us there? I don't know, anything else to add, Gracie, that I may have missed?
I would say, like, I think many of these things, like, you know, happen before someone even walks through the door, or happen before an escalation occurs. Like, these are things to kind of mitigate the chances of that happening. Like Jasper alluded to, having ground rules or expectations, having some sort of like code of conduct, building a culture of trust, I think is always ongoing. So I think this is a mix of both like in the moment things, but also things that you do prior to someone getting escalated or getting amped up. So yeah, kind of a both and. I think that's all I would add.
Yeah, super hear that. Recommend definitely. I mean, Gracie and I kind of come from the public health background, right? I think a lot of you do too. We're always thinking prevention, right? How can we prevent maybe even conflict from occurring before it even occurs, right? And I think you're right on, right? That culture of trust, thinking through like safety, all these other pieces are kind of like laying a really good and strong foundation, right? To be able to have maybe more resources to pull on when you're in those conflict situations. And I see Diane in the chat. Any advice on how to handle coworkers that are the Jekyll and Hyde people, the passive aggressive people, and or sort of the backstabbers that you have to deal with every day? I know, wondering if you maybe could come off mute, Diane, and sort of like elaborate on like what you're thinking about here.
No, just, sometimes it's like, I find like some people just like to talk down to you, belittle you. They have like split personalities, or they're nice to your face, but then they, talk about you behind your back and gets back to you type of thing. And like, how do you confront people like that? And just to, I don't know, just like, not that everyone's going to be friends, but, just, have to work together. So, why make it a toxic environment when it doesn't have to be?
So maybe, right. So definitely dealing with folks who maybe, I'll lovingly say have different communication styles, maybe, or who maybe process information differently. No, I definitely hear what you're saying. And we'll sort of get into this in a little bit too, but I just really recommend, right, like maintaining your own boundaries and maintaining clear communication, right? I think this is where we kind of lean back into that, like, well, we can only control what we can control, right? And we're not trying to maybe you're not trying to change your coworker's mind on like, that you're a phenomenal, beautiful worker and employee and, you're phenomenal, maybe we're just trying to change the behavior, right? Like, hey, if you have constructive criticism or feedback, please give that to me directly, right? That's when we can really, I think, lean into like some of these, some of the, maybe more of the, maybe leaning a bit more heavily into the informing piece of the asking, listening, and informing. But chances are, right, there's also maybe a root cause why, maybe some of these, not as clear communicators are maybe reacting the way they are. Maybe they're feeling insecure in their own work, right? Maybe there's definitely a root cause to that behavior, right? So that's maybe when we can lean into some of that asking, listening, and informing, to see like, hey, what's going on? Like, is the way that I'm doing the process that I'm taking to get to this end goal, like maybe the way I'm working on this report or the way I'm handling this client, do you not agree with that approach? Like, are there other approaches that you have taken before? I think just trying to maybe tease apart some of that, while also, and I say this with a caveat of like, if a person is being disrespectful to you, set your boundaries. You don't have to engage with that disrespect, right? Once again, just, it's, I don't know what situations you're coming from, so I'm trying to sort of give like this blanket advice.
Well, like say two people went for the same position, one got the promotion, the other didn't. Now there's this jealousy and, stuff like that.
Got it. So yeah, maybe that's a conversation you can have with the other person about, what are some other professional development, goals or targets I can help you meet, right? Like, what are the different ways I can help you grow in your position now so that the next time a promotion is available, you have a really, really strong, chance to get at that, right? There's different ways I think you can kind of try to approach. I don't know, anything else to add, Gracie? I feel like it's a tricky one because there's always different workplace environments and cultures too, I think, at play, depending on where you work.
Yeah, Diane, definitely. I commend you for naming it. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced that. I just want to uplift something Anthony put in the chat saying like, I need to be able to trust you and you need to trust me in this working relationship. How can we do that? And I also added like, if you can name how this person's behavior is impacting you, I think that's really powerful sometimes. Like, when you say this is how it impacts me, or your behavior impacts me in this way, just to like paint a really clear picture. And if someone can't change their behavior or modify behavior, then you know, you can have some really strict boundaries and like, you know, if they're not going to change, they're not going to change. But I think Jasper also alluded to some great boundary setting practices, but I think that's all I would add.
Yeah, and the last piece I'll say too, before we move into, since these are some of the more meta level, sort of, you know, back burner things to keep in mind on this slide, you can always use, right, that like one team approach as well, right? So we work at the same company. Clearly, we're all working, you know, towards maybe the same vision or whatever the mission of the organization is, right? So like say Gracie and I are getting into like petty fights and it's not, you know, we're bumping heads. You know, maybe that's when Gina or Tanayo or Victoria steps in and says, you know, well, we all work here at the Community Health Training Institute. So clearly we all are at least in some way, shape or form, right, committed to this idea of, you know, health and racial equity and trying to make sure that we're providing good, high quality trainings to folks, right? You know, you can find maybe different ways to hopefully try to like realign maybe what those priorities are as well, right? And just kind of maybe remind folks of sort of the bigger picture and grounding sort of the context a little bit more maybe, right? And kind of the whatever your workplace goals are or something like that, right? Because then once it's like, oh, well, we're just being petty or, you know, whatever, it's just like, it looks a little bit silly, right? So there's different ways you might be able to also shed a little bit more light or context on the situation to maybe decenter some of those instances of conflict or harm or what have you. Yeah, any other questions, things that are coming up for folks? And also just not necessarily my wheelhouse or maybe our wheelhouse as traders too, but if there is bullying, also maybe definitely reach out to HR. Like definitely also engage the organizational resources that you have. Yeah, any other thoughts, questions on some of these conflicts, tips, ideas?
Something that's worked for me is that you know, I try my best, okay, keyword try, not to personalize other people's stuff, like, and not to absorb it. A lot of the time, like, people are just dealing with a lot of stuff happening in their personal life. And, you know, you come to work and you show up and you have to put on that mask. And sometimes people just bleed onto others. And it's not, you know, it's not that, I mean, sometimes they do intend to, right? But sometimes it just happens. And I just try not to take a lot of things personal and say, you know, like, that's their stuff. This has absolutely nothing to do with me. I can be compassionate and, you know, obviously have my boundaries, but just, you know, oh, sorry, I'm just reading the chat, but yeah, that's just their stuff. Like, it really, you know, who knows what they're dealing with? You know, who knows? Maybe they didn't sleep well the night before. Maybe they're having marital conflict or childcare issues or whatever, you know. Yeah, we've all been through a lot. So I just try not to take a lot of things personal. Oh, thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, agree with Shannon. Well said, Chanel. And adding that those lines may get even more blurry when you work from home, right? And I know I was thrown off when my dog was like, pick me up like 5 seconds ago, right? Now think about what that, you know, you only see what's coming through the Zoom screen, right? Or what folks are showing up to with work. So I think that's a super phenomenal reminder, right, Chanel? I mean, we talk about sort of that iceberg of behavior. You know, we're only seeing, right, what's happening in a conflict or in a person, that like little baby bit above the surface. We don't know what's going on underneath. And definitely echoing too, I think what Dora is saying too, right? This is a larger structural problem as well too, because if the work environment itself is really toxic and tricky to navigate, that's only going to magnify, right, the messiness of trying to navigate a conflict in those environments as well. You know, especially when there's maybe not really well-defined boundaries and leadership sort of takes advantage of that. So lots of thumbs ups to what's coming through in the chat. I'm going to keep us moving quickly through these next couple of slides. So this is just sort of some different maybe tips and tricks to keep in mind for nonverbal communication, right? We talked a little bit about how kind of that body language doesn't maybe come across as strongly when you're on Zoom. Which is why I know I myself as a facilitator try to be really animated and use my hands and try to be engaging on the screen, because I know that it's not in person and that It's much easier, right, to sort of get distracted maybe in a virtual environment. But ultimately, what we want you to take sort of from this SAVES acronym, right, is that nonverbal communication always lands first, right? Gracie can be saying the most beautiful, calming, grounding, and incredible message, but she's saying it 2 inches from my face and is like all up in my personal space, and is like wildly flailing her arms around. I'm not gonna hear it. Right? So just recommend some physical nonverbal communication tips, right? Is to sort of respect those personal bubbles of space, to take an assertive but confident posture, right? Stay open, shoulders back. Don't, get right up in someone's face or be flailing your arms around. Keep your gestures small, keep your voice and tone steady. Eye contact can be tricky, right? Some folks feel maybe really seen and validated when you maintain eye contact. Some people might see that as an escalation or a threat, especially if you're addressing them directly, facing them directly head on. So eye contact can sometimes maybe be tricky, but maintain a safe stance, right? Especially, particularly if you're in person, right? Make sure that you yourself are feeling okay and grounded, but say your things with confidence. Try to keep an even keel is kind of the secret sauce here. Yeah, anything else to add, Gracie, on like nonverbal communication things?
I think just reiterating that most of what comes out of our mouths like actually doesn't come out of our mouths. Like we're saying so much with affect, tone, posture, stance, body language. And people can read that and sometimes misread it. So just be mindful of that. That's all I would add.
Yeah, and Astrid, I see your hand.
Cultural humility, I'll just say that, and everybody knows what I'm talking about. Just when you said eye contact, that flew up right away. So having some cultural humility would be important too, because what comes across Western, Anglo, etc. culture could be read very differently from another cultural perspective where communication looks in terms of body language different. Just want to say that.
Yep, phenomenal point. And elevating too, what I see Anthony putting in the chat as well, right? It's a fine line, but try not to be patronizing, right? I think that's really definitely where like that tone piece comes in. And that's also where to throw it back to ALI, asking, listening, and informing. That's definitely where that's why I stress the like asking for permission piece, because you don't want to just be like, and here's all the advice, here's all the solutions, this is what you should do, this is what's going to happen if you do this thing, right? To really sort of center, once again, that person's agency is a phenomenal way to make sure that you're not being patronizing, that you're not like talking down, you're saying these are the consequences, right? You're really, really grounding that with the person and giving them that choice. Right. And so that takes us to verbal communication. Spent a whole lot of time talking about tone of voice, right? I would also say volume of voice is a piece there as well too. You don't want to, once again, be shouting at people and that's an understandable, and I think it's a natural reaction too, because of like what we talked about. When your heart starts beating, cortisol is pumping, you're feeling really, really energized or agitated, and your voice is going to be louder. So just paying attention to that tone of voice and the volume of voice. This next point I think can be really tricky to do well. I'll just name that, but not defending rules and policies, right? There's a difference between informing a person of like, this is unfortunately like these are the rules or the norms or the policies in place, right? If you're shouting and making a scene during quiet hours, we might have to ask you to please leave the building, or we might have to take you out of the space. That's different from defending the rules and policies and saying, well, this is what they are, and this is what they are, and that's too bad, but you're doing against them, and you're gonna have to, there's a difference between sort of that informing and that like sort of protecting or reiterating the power of the system that's in place, right? Because one is directly tied to sort of behavior and sort of a chain of events of consequences or options or choices they have, and the other one is just kind of reiterating and highlighting maybe the power of the system or the institution that might be the problem, right? So that's kind of a trickier fine line, but definitely don't defend those rules or policies when you could instead maybe be talking about them in a more neutral light, especially if the rules and policies are the root of the conflict. We talked a lot about providing options, acknowledging where a person's at, acknowledging their emotions, where they're coming to you from is powerful. And apologizing too, right? We haven't really talked about that much, right? But like the power of an apology to say, you know, I'm sorry, you're right. The thing that happened to you was actually fucked up and was bad. And I'm sorry about that. You know, maybe it's not even like your personal fault, right? Maybe, you know, Gracie's my caseworker and I missed an appointment with her and I show up the next time with unscheduled and like, oh my God, you know, I had this meeting with this other caseworker and they didn't show up and, you know, like I'm super mad about this, you know, being able to offer that apology and say, hey, I'm sorry that, you know, that happened, can be really, really powerful if people are feeling really hurt and upset, right? I think not arguing is fairly self-explanatory. Right? Maybe don't devolve into arguing with the person, which can be difficult too, right? Don't get me wrong. Like, and if you find yourself arguing, once again, maybe you just need to take a step back. Maybe you're not the right person to de-escalate in that situation, and that's okay, right? Offering to help, and then of course, just using kind and compassionate language, right? Notice in the role play that Gracie and I did, Gracie was nothing but incredibly kind and understanding, and not once did she downplay, right, the feeling of emotions that I was having, right? Because maybe I was making a huge scene and, you know, this was just over, you know, a person cutting me in front of line, but she didn't try to downplay that and say, well, you know, all they did was cut in front of you in line, right? Instead saying, yeah, you know, I can see how you're feeling really upset about that. You know, that's understandable. That's, you know, I hear that, right? Like, what can we do to try to make sure that you're, you know, we're not trying to turn off that upset emotion, right? But we're trying to fix maybe some of the problem and some of the things we have in control, right? And as Gracie said in the chat, right, definitely tapping into that sense of empathy, like that I had used the quiet hours before, right? And now I want to try to make sure that I'm being kind to others as well as possible. Yeah. Any other, I don't know, Gracie, anything to add? Other folks, anything to add? Any thoughts, questions, comments, other advice you might add to the verbal communication bucket?
It's not really rocket science, but there is some nuance and like, you know, considerations, but this isn't like Jasper and I aren't presenting anything that you probably all don't already know or that's massively groundbreaking, right? But it's like, how can you deploy this in a moment of tenseness or conflict or escalation? And I think you all have raised important kind of caveats and considerations. So yeah, just want to uplift. It doesn't have to feel super complex or like rocket science.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and you all 100%, I can say this with such confidence, are already using a variety of these strategies when you're, you know, practicing healthy communication and trying to resolve conflicts already, right? So we're just reminding you kind of, right, maybe what are the different options, and maybe sort of planting some of these seeds for you to sort of water and practice with as you sort of continue. This is more of maybe just even like a refresher for folks. And so with that in mind, we're going to kind of, you know, having covered maybe some of these more concrete different tips and tricks, we're going to kick you all off into another role play. And the scenario we'll put in the chat as well here, but wondering if someone can come off of mute who we haven't heard from yet today, just to read this scenario out loud.
I can read it.
Yeah, go for it.
You are a full-time salary staff member of a coalition working to address food insecurity in your town in Central MA, or is that Massachusetts? I think so. You oversee the volunteer program. One day you walk into the coalition building and see another full-time salaried employee yelling at a volunteer employee. You hear them say, "You don't know anything, you're just a volunteer." You approach and attempt to intervene and de-escalate.
Perfect. Thanks for reading that, Kim. So the directions for this role play are going to be pretty similar, I think, to the same one that you all did previously. once again, where the person with the longest hair will be the person yelling at the volunteer, the person with the shortest hair will be the person trying to de-escalate, and then whoever's got the in-between length hair will be the observer. And so what we want you to do here is don't just use the asking, listening, and forming skills, but do your best to sort of have a dialogue. And in this case, right, we're thinking we're in person, right? You're in person while this is happening. Think about some of those verbal, but especially the non-verbal kind of communication strategies that we covered, right? You'll be in these rooms for, let's say, about 10 minutes to give enough time for some of the content afterwards. And we'll give you all a message about halfway through if you'd like to switch roles. Cool. Sound good to folks? Any questions about this activity? Yeah, no worries, Gina. Yeah, feel free to step away. This is why we also want to put you in the groups of 3. So if someone has to sort of just take a quick breather, there should still be enough folks to kind of do this activity. Any questions? Okay. I think, Victoria, you were good to work your Zoom magic.
This meeting is being recorded.
There we go. I think a bunch of us tried to hit the resume recording button at the same time. But welcome back, folks. Looks like folks were really chatting to the full extent. So hopefully those breakout rooms went well. Just curious and hearing from a couple groups, just how did that go? What worked well? What felt challenging? And especially for us as trainers, if there's anything else that you all still feel like you need more guidance on. Yeah, I see your hand, Diane.
Hi, let me just take it. Hi, so there were 3 of us, but I think one had to break away, so we didn't really have an observer. And then the other person was off camera. So, but what was challenging was didn't really know how to define food security and really didn't know what the volunteer did and why this other employee was yelling at them. So it was kind of hard to, address it. And then the person that was doing the yelling, like, didn't really know, like, what were they yelling at the volunteer about. So when you walk in on something, yeah, you're trying to, like, intervene and like, like there's 2 sides to every story, so to speak. So you're trying to get, each person's side. But it would have been helpful to me to understand what was meant by food security and why there was this volunteer program. What was the purpose of the volunteer program?
Yeah, totally. Hear your feedback. We'll definitely keep that in consideration for maybe making a little bit more of a clear or more fleshed out maybe prompt with a couple extra details. Do folks have anything else? Yeah, what else came up for folks? Particularly thinking about maybe some of the de-escalation skills or pieces that maybe resonated that you tried, or maybe that just didn't totally work. Yeah, I see your hand, Erica. Oh, and you are.
Oh no, I'm good now. Okay. I think I was the person who intervened, and I think in those situations, it's the first step is to like separate people and ask for support for the volunteer. But then as we were talking, I was offering some solutions, and it was Shannon, I believe her name is, and it was just kind of like, it wasn't working, and not coming down and saying like, well, maybe do something, like we can work on something else. And, it was just more like, it just wasn't getting de-escalated. And I feel like in real life, I will struggle with maintaining that ground. But I think it, in this situation, I would probably say, I do understand where you're coming from, but like this, we can't be, interacting with the public like this, or, like we also talked about, what if, there isn't enough staff, because then the conversation kind of became like, well, you know what, okay, let's just separate and you can do something else. But it's like, what if there isn't that option? So I found that challenging.
Yeah, definitely hear that. And I think for what it's worth, I do think that if you were able to even just separating, right, sort of the employee who's yelling at the volunteer, right, is even like a step. I would argue that's like a step in the right direction of de-escalating the situation, right? I mean, you stopped the behavior, the immediate conflict, right, of the person yelling at the other person, right? So in terms of at least even just trying to interrupt and sort of you know, engage and kind of throw a wedge into maybe what's directly happening in front of you, I think is an excellent first step, right? So, you know, I think, you know, that to me sounds like you already, right? We're not trying to go from you can remember the beginning, the like red angry face all the way to the green happy face. Maybe we're not able to get all the way to the green happy face, right? But if we can just get it to maybe like the orange frowning face or like the yellow face, right? Like that's still a step in the right direction, right? Yeah, and definitely hear folks too on having the slide with skills listed as like a process training tip. So definitely hear that. I know we're coming up, we have about 20 minutes left. So I've taken a little bit more time in this section. So I'm going to give it to Gracie to quickly kind of close us out with some trauma-informed pieces, and then we'll close.
Great. Thanks, Jasper. And thanks everybody for humoring us and taking part in the role plays. You know, just want to reemphasize, I know they're like simulated, they can feel awkward, but really the only way we get good at doing these skills is to practice them. And so I hope you had just like a little nugget of time to try on what that can look like in a practice setting, hopefully a low stakes practice setting. But we are going to end this training, this last section, thinking about trauma-informed practices or trauma-informed approaches, and how a lot of the principles of trauma-informed approaches and practices can actually like help mitigate the chances of de-escalations happening in the first place. I won't say that, you know, even the best run programs that are trauma-informed and healing centered probably still do have conflict and escalations arise, but I would be willing to bet that they probably happen far less because they have these principles implemented into their programs. And just briefly want to start off with this concept of getting our needs met, whether that's the program participants or clients or staff that we're working with. But when people feel like they get their needs met, they probably won't get escalated in the first place, right? So this concept of love and belonging. So like this is linked to feeling safe and feeling accepted in a space. We've alluded to power, not like power over someone, but power with people, right? And if I feel like I have the power to contribute to a program or to make a difference or an impact in the work that I'm doing, that's a need that's getting met. Freedom, right? To be ourselves, to be our authentic selves, feeling self-directed in whatever we're choosing to do. And then also hopefully having fun. This is like an aspect of getting our needs met as well. We want, you know, the young people we're working with, our coalition members, our clients, our participants to have fun and to engage in programs that are nurturing our skills and have a space of belonging and acceptance. And that is all kind of wrapped up into fun. I think we've alluded to this, but like a lot of people we work with, like maybe haven't had their needs met, right? And still are not having their needs met. And so just want to link this concept to why people might be escalated in the first place. And just want to move into thinking about the 6 principles of a trauma-informed approach. These actually come from SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and is widely used, widely adopted. But does someone mind just reading these out loud on the screen for us? Maybe a new voice. Go ahead, Diane.
Okay, safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, voice and choice, cultural, historical, and gender responsiveness.
Thanks a lot, Diane. So what do folks make of these? Like, why do you think these are part of like a trauma-informed approach? What is standing out? Maybe what like themes or parallels do you see with what we've talked about already today? Anything that folks notice that you want to name?
I'm noticing that the word trauma or life experiences doesn't even exist on here at all, other than cultural, historical, gender responsiveness, but trauma is nowhere to be found. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe that's like, maybe SAMHSA did that on purpose. I'm not sure, Astrid, but that's a interesting something to pull out. But yeah, I think you're right. Trauma isn't really named anywhere in this. Anything else that folks notice? Yes, go ahead, Shannon.
Safety keeps getting repeated over and over and over again. That, you know, definitely your own safety and the safety of the person that you're dealing with should be like forefront in the mind, because it seems to be a common thread throughout everything we've learned today.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. And not just like feeling physically safe, but like psychologically safe, right? At work or in the spaces that we're in. So appreciate you naming that. Let's see, something came in the chat. Margaret saying respect and interdependentness. Do you want to say more about that, Margaret?
Just looking at all these things, they all have just respecting people's humanity, and that we all need to rely on each other.
Yeah. Yeah. That bar is kind of low, right? Like, like we talk about it like it's really complex, but like honoring someone's like dignity and humanity costs us nothing, right? And actually does not take, I would argue, any effort. Like it's the bar is really low. And that's like really the first step. And if you can like have humility about people's different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, historical backgrounds, if you can be willing to like have empathy and show humility and support one another, if you can be transparent, yeah, the rules might suck in the program, right? And I didn't write the rules, but I'm having to enforce the rules. And if I can convey that to Jasper, like, yeah, I'm really sorry, this rule feels really difficult, Jasper. I agree with you. And, you know, unfortunately, there's not much I can do about it. How can we come to an understanding that we can abide by this rule, right? I think if you can be transparent about many things, that builds a lot of trust. And I've heard a lot of you allude to the fact that trust doesn't exist because your higher ups are not transparent, right? Or like things are kind of shady or things are kind of done behind closed doors. That's like a straight ticket to like have your staff not trust you. So just be transparent, right? It doesn't have to be great. Like it can feel ugly saying the transparent truth, but like people will respect you more and trust you more. Diane saying communication is key. Amy saying we are in this together. Yeah. Jasper, anything that you want to add to this? And then I'll ask one final question and then we'll close.
Yeah, I don't think anything in particular. Would just echo, I think part of the kind of like the underscored piece to a lot of these different things on the slide, right, is just that acknowledgement, right? That acknowledgement that this is what first came to my mind, right? When I think Astrid, you pointed out like that trauma is actually not listed anywhere in any of these pieces, right? I think a big piece to a trauma-informed approach is just acknowledging that there might be trauma in the room, that people might be carrying that with them into the space, and that's okay. And that's where some of these different pieces, right, of that mutuality, that safety, that voice and choice, right, kind of come in, right? But I think that's kind of like the underscored piece too, is just acknowledging where folks are coming from. And that you don't have to, you shouldn't be forcing people to like just, you know, to be vulnerable in spaces if that's not coming willingly, right? That's like not what we're asking for here. We're putting the agency with the person to be able to sort of share and have that choice, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yep.
And I just see Anthony put in the chat, I'm trying to get those 6 into love, belonging, power, freedom, fun. Yeah, like that, I think they can fit in, or like there are elements of like the 6 principles of a trauma-informed approach that maybe parallel getting our needs met. So I appreciate you trying to kind of sift through that, Anthony. But just like one final question to folks, you know, this was going to be a bit of a longer activity, but just for the sake of time, I'll kind of just pose it to the group. So thinking about the 6 principles of trauma-informed approach, and maybe Jasper, would you be willing to paste those 6 principles in the chat so folks can reference them? But would love to hear from some folks and maybe some new voices that we haven't heard yet in the space. Which principles of the trauma-informed approach could your program improve on? And how could you go about incorporating these improvements into your programming? So maybe you do some things really well, like maybe you do have a peer support model. Maybe you do a really good job of ensuring safety, both like physical safety and psychological safety. But maybe like there are some things, some other principles that aren't really coming out in your programming. Do folks have thoughts about that? What your program like kind of lacks, but how you could fill that need or that gap? And thank you, Jasper. Jasper, they just put them in the chat for folks. Yeah, Shannon, go ahead.
So in our organization, we talk a lot about transparency, but I don't feel like it's always there. You know, like they you know, that piece, you know, always seems like you're finding out after the fact about different initiatives and different things that are going on, and it feels like you're playing catch up rather than trying to, you know, stay ahead of things. And if things were more transparent, you would be able to kind of see what's coming and kind of plan for it. But there is but on the flip side, there is a lot of collaboration that does go on. So if you're part of that, you know, piece, you know, you're in the know, but you're not allowed to speak about it until it's ready to be rolled out. So I feel like if there'd be more buy-in, we work at a school, so I think there'd be more teacher buy-in if they were part of the process versus like having people plan for them behind the scenes and then bringing it forward.
Yeah. Real, Shannon. And how could that be conveyed? Like, I don't want to hear about this initiative when it's ready to go. I would like to be a part of it. And maybe just honing in on that. Like we have a lot of collaboration at this school, and this is like one of our core values. I wonder why we've missed it in this setting. Like, how has that not been translated into this? Because I want to take part in these initiatives or help create those initiatives. Does that sound like that's something that could be conveyed or communicated?
Yeah, I mean, I really think it needs to, I think some of these ideas that like mostly administrators have should like be rolled out as an idea and like, you know, say, listen, this is something we're working on, and you know, we'd like to form some committees to see how this would proceed and look for volunteers, so that way more people have a chance to join in where that doesn't really happen.
Yeah, so you're kind of naming those pieces already. Appreciate that. Thanks, Shannon. I see some things are just coming in the chat. James saying good points. Anthony saying our university, as it should be, is big on diversity, equity, inclusion, given the state of the world. Dora saying, I think that's true for everyone, Shannon. We want to be included in the process and have our voice and opinions be validated in the work we do. James saying, sometimes being told to stay in, quote unquote, stay in your lane is a way to prevent any conversation about an issue, which could be benefited by discussion. I think you're right on with that, James. Or like, maybe the people in power don't want to like concede their power or like admit that there is a power imbalance. So appreciate that. Okay, friends, I know this was, you know, we could talk for another hour about this, but I am mindful of time, that we have about 5 minutes left together. And you know, we could have done a whole big conversation about this, but I hope this is like a starting point for you all to think about the principles of a trauma-informed approach, how this really connects with conflict and de-escalation, and how the more we can embody some of the trauma-informed approaches and principles, hopefully like the less likely it is that people will have conflict or there will be escalations. There still may be, but hopefully you're mitigating the chances of those happening. And I know that we've thrown a lot at you today and really appreciate you hanging with us. And I might throw it back to Jasper to take us through the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, happy to. I know Victoria just put the feedback form link in the chat, so definitely want to give a big plug to that. That really helps Gracie and I know sort of what resonated and what worked really well today for you all, and then what are maybe some of the pieces that we could tweak and continue to improve on. So that would be a phenomenal help to us. If you could just fill out the feedback form, it shouldn't take very long. And just as we close out, would really love to hear from you all sort of kind of what you're leaving with, right? Like maybe what are some of the skills that you're hoping to bring with you into your workplace today, or maybe just a one-word takeaway. But would love to sort of hear from you all, either in the chat or just come off of mute, so we kind of know, we kind of understand where you all are at, sort of being released now back into the rest of your work days. Yeah. I see folks putting in the chat, folks are feeling grounded, empowered, renewed. Thank you, Dora calling us awesome as always. And we also, I will say we are open also to constructive criticism and feedback as well. But folks are giving some maybe thumbs ups to empowered, enlightened, feeling a little bit more structured maybe. Awesome. It's great to hear from you all. If you're interested and if you're like, wow, I love Gracie and Jasper so much, I will come back. Actually, our next training with CHTI is called Building Brave Spaces Across Difference. It's about a month from now. And in particular, Gracie and I will be co-facilitating that as well. And we'll be sort of giving a focus on sort of how to make spaces more LGBTQ plus affirming and inclusive for different workspaces. So encourage you to check that out if you're interested. That will be online as well. And you can sort of just register on the website, or, there's, I'm sure, a bajillion different ways you can sort of get connected. But that will be happening next month. And then ultimately too, if you want to sort of stay in the loop with CHTI, there's our website. I guess it's technically X now, not Twitter, but we have our Twitter account. And then there's of course a LinkedIn group. So if you'd like to sort of come and sort of network and chat with other former training participants and get connected to other resources as they're available, you're more than welcome to do that as well. It's lots of different places to sort of plug in, but we'll leave it there. I know December is next month, which does not feel real. I know the Mariah Carey, songs are all headed our way, but we'll leave it there. And, happy to linger if you have any extra questions or thoughts, but ultimately just a huge thank you to you all for attending today. Please fill out the feedback form. And yeah, we're here if you have any other sort of questions or comments or thoughts.